So, what's the difference between a LEP grant and an Innovate UK grant? Let me explain what a LEP is first. In England, there are 38 local enterprise partnerships. They more or less correspond with a county. So for the West Yorkshire area, it would be Leeds LEP. So what I'm going to talk about this morning in terms of a LEP, most LEPs have similar programs, but they will have different names and they will have different scope and different sizes, etc. So because I'm in Leeds, I'm going to talk about West Yorkshire. In terms of Innovate UK, that I'm going to talk about, that covers the whole of the UK. So you just need to look at the detail in each one. So what's the difference between a LEP grant and an Innovate UK grant? Well, the LEP grant, so long as you are eligible and that program has not run out of money, if you submit a compliant application, you should usually get it, whether it's 10% or 20% or 50% or whatever. Now, if you are eligible for an Innovate UK grant, you will only get it if you are successful in competition with others. So you can put in what you think is an absolutely fantastic application, but it might not just make the mark. And the reason, because others are better. Now, it's very, very subjective. Based on my experience, it does seem that if you have a very technical application, you are probably more likely to win funding than something like a web-based application or something like that. But that's just based on my experience of it. So before you go down the road of wasting months or spending months, wasting months of your time on an application, you've got to appreciate that actually there might be a nil result at the end of it. So you need to bear that in mind. Okay, so overall funding trends. What we've got is we've got the local versus the national. So you've got the 4 countries of the UK. Each has a slightly different approach in terms of local grants. So England, Scotland, Wales, Northern Ireland. Innovate UK covers the whole lot. And within England, you've got the 38 LEPs and the equivalent bodies in those other 3 countries. So grants tend to be match funded, which basically means is if the project's 100,000 and there's a 50% grant, then you put in 50% and either the LEP or the government puts in the other 50%. Typically, they are retrospective, which means you must apply, you must have it approved, you must spend the money, and then you must claim it back. There recently have been some exceptions to that in the Innovate UK grants related to COVID, but typically grants are retrospective. Most grants are also restricted to SMEs. And when I'm talking about SMEs, I'm still using the European definition of less than 250 staff and a balance sheet of smaller than 40 million euros and turnover of less than 40 million. They're approximate figures for the turnover. There may be some changes now that we've had Brexit, but at the moment, that's what I would assume. Grants are focused on strategy areas that are of interest to the government and to the LEP. And so that means that certain things will always attract funding, manufacturing, particularly digital these days, anything that creates jobs. But there are certain exceptions as well, and they tend to be covered elsewhere. So agriculture is typically in the past, that was there was a lot of EU funding around that, and retail. And it seems that the government and the LEPs don't like to fund retail because they view that if you give money to one retail business through a grant program, that all it does, if it's successful, it displaces spending from another retail operation. You can argue all day about whether that's correct, and you could argue the same about manufacturing businesses and all the rest of it, but those are the rules. Typically, the bigger the grant you're applying for, the more the detail, the longer the application, and there might be more than one stage. And you must understand the timescales associated with a grant. Typically, even for a local LEP grant, you're looking at months rather than weeks from start to finish. So if you are looking to do something very, very quickly, you need to bear that in mind. So we talked about SMEs. I'm talking about Leeds LEP, so that's West Yorkshire. You need to be based in Leeds City region. Those regional boundaries have recently changed. It did previously cover the likes of Barnsley and Harrogate, and that no longer does. So less than 250 staff. and under the de minimis limits. And de minimis is the European system of ensuring a level playing field, which basically means that you cannot claim more than 200,000 euros over 3 years. Again, there may be some change around that, but I'm not aware of any at the moment. Typically, sectors that are excluded: agriculture, often it's financial services, education, social care, and B2C retail. Now, you need to look at the detail of each grant because different grants are designed to do different things. So, for instance, I've worked on programs in the past where if you had a negative balance sheet, you weren't eligible. The program I'm working on at the moment is very, very broad. It covers most everything. So look at the detail before you spend a lot of time on an application. Common themes. These are themes that you will find in Leeds LEP and most other LEPs as well. Business growth, skills, access to finance. So that's, how to raise investment, how to raise grants, startup, both pre-startup and actual startup. And that's usually taken as from the day of startup up to 3 years of operation. Manufacturing, resource efficiency, so that's energy, water, gas, materials. Innovation, and that's the program I'm involved in at the moment. So it's innovation of products and services, innovation of business model, innovation of systems and processes. Export, we're now into Brexit, but out of the EU, export has got a lot of priority. Productivity, how do you get more bang for your buck? This is it's a long running problem for British industry. And digital. There's a lot of interest in this area at the moment. So each LEP has got a different strategy and personalities come into this. I mean, again, if I look at, say, Sheffield City region and Leeds City region, they've taken a very different approach. A lot more money is funded towards heavy engineering down in Sheffield. So there's a bit of luck of the draw. It depends on what postcode you're in as to what access to funding you can get. Popular programs in Leeds, and this is not an exclusive list. There are dozens of programs. Adventure, which is for startup, manufacturing growth program, business growth program, digital enterprise, PAPI, and #grow. Now I'm going to go through those in a little bit more detail one by one. But as I say, this is not exclusive. And if you are wondering what you're eligible for, the best thing to do is to contact the LEP. In some areas, it's called a growth hub instead of a LEP, and speak to your local growth manager. So Adventure, up to 3 years. It's very flexible range of supports. Grants of up to 25,000. My understanding it's 50% typically. However, in the first year, you may not get the full 25k. And the reason for that is obviously you've got no track record. Now, one of the problems with being a startup is that very often you will have to provide more information. So if you've got no track record, you've got no financial accounts, you will have to provide a detailed business plan, a forecast, cash flow forecast, etc. It looks great, but there is quite a lot of detail there. And it's a good exercise to go through if you've not done a detailed business plan, and actually preparing one is a useful exercise because you will need it if you want any bank funding, etc. Manufacturing growth program. Well, in terms of grants overall, I would describe grants in terms of a dartboard. Most of you, I'm sure, have played darts. The bullseye, the center, somewhere where you will always get a grant is manufacturing. Every LEP wants to support manufacturing. Every government wants to support manufacturing. As you go further away from the center, you've got other areas like retail. You've got digital and innovation and the like. And until you get to the edge of the board and beyond the metal ring, and you're throwing into your mother's paint work, well, that is retail out there. That is a desert usually. If you're in agriculture or retail, it is very difficult typically to get grants from the LEP. There are exceptions. So within West Yorkshire, and actually this MGP is one of those programs that goes cross-border, so it covers North Yorkshire and now South Yorkshire and Humberside as well, I believe. They split it into grants for both consultancy and machinery, typically grants of 34%. And you can go for multiple grants as well. So you can have one project 34% on £25,000 of machinery. You can then apply again for a consultancy. You can then apply again for machinery. It just depends on how much money they've got left in the pot. Business Growth Programme. This is very much the flagship programme for Leeds LEP. It's very flexible, provided you're in manufacturing and you are growing the business. So you can get it for fit out of new premises, or you can get it for machinery. The grants can be quite big. The projects can be quite big, but the grant size is usually 10% for over 50 staff, 20% for under 50 staff. And it's quite a long process in my experience. I've also added the links below for if these slides are shared later. Digital vouchers. This is probably the simplest application process you'll ever come across. It's an online portal, just a few questions about your business, asking you things like what's your address, registration number, internet speed, all that. Again, very flexible. Software, hardware, anything with a digital theme. But if you apply today, you'll usually get it in 3 or 4 months, because I know they're inundated with applications. This is another cross-border program, covers not only West Yorkshire, but North Yorkshire. It's based out of the University of York, and you can get a 40% grant on a project of up to 20k for equipment related to innovation. And the last one is #Grow, which is specifically designed to support the growth of digital businesses. So you can, again, very flexible. It's fit out equipment consultancy, but a minimum project size of 20k. So each of those different target market, different grant size, different applications. So the standard application process will be, you've got to find a program that suits you, suits your needs, that you're eligible for. You submit the grant application. More often than not these days it's online. It can also be a paper application. Then there's typically a growth manager meeting or a program manager meeting where they'll talk to you about what you're trying to achieve, understand your objectives, understand what the project's about. If they're happy with it, they'll give you an approval letter. You can then go and spend the money on the goods and services. Now, this is a critical point. You should never spend unless you've got approval. Otherwise, you cannot claim for that. They will not facilitate retrospective applications. You're then submitting this, and eventually you'll get your grant payment. As you can imagine, because you've got a number of loops in that process, it's going to take months, usually, rather than weeks. Problems with grants. I would describe the grant situation as like shifting sands. I'm fairly au fait with grants in Leeds City region, and I couldn't tell you everything that's happening. I could tell you something today and it changes tomorrow because they've run out of money, or they've changed the program, or you know, there's a different priority. So keep in touch with your growth manager. Sign up to the Growth Hub or the LEP and get regular updates. That is my advice if you're interested in grants. Got to remember, most businesses will be eligible for more than one grant. So think how you're going to package it all together. So if you think about a manufacturing business that is expanding, you might be eligible for new machinery. You might be eligible for consultancy around the installation of that machinery. You maybe need a new website or new software. And so you can have several grants. So again, sequencing those grants is important. Understand the eligibility criteria. There are some tricky elements to it. So for instance, if you were looking to move premises, in some circumstances, if you'd already signed the lease, you might not be eligible. So get in early. Don't leave it until you're just about to move and then assume that you'll be eligible. Speak to your growth manager, get the application done very, very early is my advice. Remember, when you are filling in an application, you've got to make your case. Don't just assume that they will understand what you're talking about. make it in clear, simple English. And if you've got the opportunity to put an addendum in, or maybe a business plan, then take that opportunity. You've got to also understand it takes administrative effort. It's not just a time issue, it's the issue of somebody being responsible for that grant application from start to finish. The best thing is if one person handles that. If you've got multiple people involved in the project, get one person to gather all the information, gather the quotes, gather the layout plan of the machinery, etc., and coordinate that. If you can't do it internally, bring somebody in from outside. There are bid writers out there who will do the applications for you. However, you will still need somebody on the inside to pull together all the company information. And very often, a LEP grant will be linked to job creation. So my understanding is for a BGP grant, for every 10,000 grant, they'll be looking for one new job created, or in some circumstances, one job protected. But the job creation element is important. Okay, right, so that's the first half. That's a whistle-stop tour of LEP grants. As I say, that's more focused very much on Leeds LEP, but a lot of it will be applicable to other LEP areas. Speak to the growth hub, the growth manager, to understand what's going on. Now, in terms of Innovate UK applications, I work for RTC North. We are the delivery partner for Innovate UK across the north of England. So that's Yorkshire, Humber, North East, North West, and we're delivering the EEN service and innovation and growth service for Innovate UK. So Innovate UK, I would describe their grants as kind of forming three main types. There's the general grants, or the competitions, I should say. For instance, the smart grants. We've got one closing this week and another one opening. They're open to SMEs. They minimum of 6 months, maximum of 36 months, depending on the size of the project. And you can get a eligible project costs between 25,000 and 2 million, and grants of up to 70%, but it will depend on what the grant is for. Okay. The other type of grant is what I would describe as a thematic grant. So is it energy? Is it transport? Is it foundation industries? And there's a whole, they salami slice the economy into various sectors that are of interest that they're trying to grow. So it's worth going to the Innovate UK website and understanding what you are, what's relevant to your business. And then I would describe it as special situations. So last year, because of COVID, there was several different competitions that were run, slightly different to usual because they were offering 100% funding and they were paying upfront rather than retrospectively. Now, they were a one-off, and I can't see those coming back, although you never know, to be honest. It depends on Innovate UK policy. So most Innovate UK applications have a similar format. And what I've done there is outlined a control sheet that I use on a Word document. And that shows the 13 main sections, 14 main sections if you include finance. So for a smart grant, you will have 10 questions, each with 400 words maximum that you can put in there, and 3 questions at the beginning that are non-scoring. They might be non-scoring, but they're critically important questions, because if you didn't fill them in, the person reading the application and assessing it would not know what it was about. So I would treat all 13 questions with the equal importance. There is the opportunity, well, you are required to put 2 appendices in. There's also 2 that you can put in. And I would take that opportunity, because as you will see later when I show you one of the questions, 400 words is not a lot of words to describe, say, your team and resources. Okay, so make the most of that opportunity. If you are applying for an Innovate UK grant, take it seriously. It is not a weekend's work by any means. I think it's really important that you understand the big picture, because again, I'll show you later, but the timescales are significant and the amount of effort required is significant. I would summarize the application process. Once you've found the application, the competition you're interested in, as 5 main elements. One will be information gathering, idea generation. So looking at the market, understanding the context for the application. Is it just UK? Is it UK and overseas? Who's your competitors? What's the market's opportunity size? How can you prove that? Where's the statistics to prove it, and all the rest of it? So get a good feel for the overview. Start writing it up. Don't worry about counting your words at this stage. Just get all the words down in the different sections. And at this point, I would say that I would never use the Innovate UK portal for this. I would always extract all those 13 questions, put them onto a Word document. And particularly if there's a team of you, you can start sending them backwards and forwards. The best thing to do, if there's 4 of you, pick 3 questions each that you're going to do and focus on those questions. Once you've got the rough draft together, it's very important then to go through it, and probably one person is the best person to do it. So you've got a standard tone of voice throughout, and get it down to 400 words per section. And it's difficult. I mean, I've done it for people in the past, and I'm not offering before you ask. And it takes several hours per section, in my experience. It is a really tough job. And you need somebody who, ideally, whose English is their first language as well, because understanding is critical. Nuances are important. Once you've done that, I would suggest uploading it to the portal. And be aware that sometimes 400 words on a Word document is not 400 words on the portal. It does count them slightly differently. And polish it. Go through it again and again until it's absolutely sort of nailed down. Make sure there's paragraphs. Make sure that you've got the presentation, because one of the things you need to understand is that the assessors, and there are 5 for each application typically, they do not have long with each application. So you've got to, rather than hiding all the information in one long 400-word paragraph, break it down into segments, relevant points. And then final check and submission. Don't leave it until last minute. It's typically submission is 11 o'clock on a Friday morning. Do not leave it till 10:59 to be submitting it. Try and get it all done the night before. Maybe do an early check that morning and then get it away. Make sure you keep a copy for future reference as well. So how to write your application. I mentioned some of this already. Dedicate the resource. Do you have somebody in your organization who can write it? If not, find somebody who can. It might be that you use a dedicated bid writer, or it might be that you use a copywriter just to improve the standard of the writing if you put down the basics, okay? However, if it's your business, your project, you are the best people to pull the information together. So you can't just throw the task on somebody else's desk. You know, the better the team effort, the more work that goes into it, the better the result. Allow at least a month to prepare. Now, you can do it on less than a month if taking a cut and paste approach and you've done previous applications. But if it's your first Innovate UK application, I would allow at least a month, possibly longer. And it's going to take over your life for a month. It's an awful job, so be committed. Use a Word template, as I mentioned. Use a spreadsheet for the financial aspects. The financial aspects are the final, and it's a very important part of the application process, pulling it all together. And those financial aspects have got to tie in with the narrative. There's a couple of sections, for instance, project management. There's no point putting one set of figures in your project management and another set in the finance. It's all got to tie together. And so getting somebody to proofread it, to pull out problems like that, would be a useful final stage. Focus on a really high quality application. And I would be saying aim for at least 7.5 per section, ideally 8. So if you can imagine that you've got an application form and it's got 100 marks, you've got 5 assessors. So essentially you've been marked out of 500. There is no point killing it on 5 sections and doing 5 very average sections. It's got to be balanced across the board, okay? So this is where the effort comes in. Don't tell the assessor what you think. Tell them what they want to hear. And I'm going to show you an example in a minute of what I mean by that. But I think it's very easy to get too close to your application, and you think it's a wonderful project and it's going to solve the world's problems in terms of energy or recycling or whatever. They're not particularly interested in that. They're interested in you answering the questions that are asked in the format. So be very careful about that. Make a strong case and support your arguments, okay? There is an element of repetition sometimes. If you are making points in a summary, you might make those points later on. But actually, 5,200 words, it sounds like a lot. By the time you've got into the weeds of it, it is not a lot of words to make a very, very strong case. So it's got to be concise. You've got to make your arguments very cleverly. I've mentioned about the 4 appendices. 2 of them are optional. Take the opportunity to use those appendices to get your story across. Add any detail in. Now, one of the questions somebody asked earlier was about a bigger bibliography. You don't need a bibliography per se, but if you are using particular statistics about the size of a market, then it is useful to put them in. The problem is if you use too many statistics from different sources, just having the references in there will take up a lot of words. So you've got to be careful about just use enough references to make it fly. And answer every question point by point. Now, what do I mean by that? Okay, so I've given you here an example of an Innovate UK Smart Grants application. This is question 2, approach and innovation. So if you look at the 3rd line down, what approach will you take and where will the focus of the innovation be? Fantastic. We're off and running. We've put 800 words down. After assessing it, we've got it down to 400 words. The problem is actually that will not get you 8 out of 10 marks. What you will need to do is look at the sub-questions. How will you respond to the need, challenge, or opportunity identified? How will you improve on the nearest current state of the art? Will it focus on the application of existing or new areas? Now, if you are not tackling those questions, if you are not incorporating those answers in your answer for question 2, you are not going to score high marks. So the way I would do it is I would do a small paragraph for each one. And then you are making it easy for the assessor. So how will you respond to the need, challenge, or opportunity identified? Start off with that. The need or challenge is, answer it, and then separate paragraph for the next one, which is the current state of the art. And just to show you the challenge of writing this, that's the first page. So you got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 sub-questions there, and you've got another 2 down there. And then at the bottom, you've got the detail around the appendix. You can submit 1 appendix. So it's optional. However, I would think it's a very, very good idea. And there are certain projects that really would benefit from including diagrams and charts. Okay. So for instance, if you were designing a new website, you might want to put the look and feel in there so that somebody can appreciate what's different about it, how it will stand out. You might want to put a flow chart of how the systems and processes will work, etc. So impact of Brexit, I've not been told about any changes to de minimis as it stands, but it's possible that that may change over time. Read the eligibility carefully in each case. It can be a little bit confusing. I was talking to a client yesterday and they had misread it and they thought because they were one type of project, not another, they could only get a 40% grant. My appreciation was that it was a 70% grant. If in doubt, send Innovate UK a quick email. Are we, this is what I'm thinking about doing. Is that a feasibility study or is it experimental or what? It's better to clarify these things early. Don't assume anything, read all the detail. And as Jane said, European collaboration is still possible under Horizon 2020. So the other thing to bear in mind is, how does all this fit together? Well, you could have LEP applications, you could have an Innovate UK Smart Grant, you could have one of the thematic ones, and you could be applying to Horizon UK, Horizon projects. So Horizon 2020, that's what I was trying to say. So how do you fit it all together? What's the resourcing around that? What's the time scales? What's the cash flow implications if you win, and cash flow implications if you don't win? And I think that's another aspect of it. For these big grants, have a plan A and a plan B. Plan A is you win, happy days. Plan B, you don't win. What do you do then? Plan C might be a resubmission. And obviously, if you want to resubmit, then at least you'll get the feedback from the first application. So think about the timescales. When's the deadline? So for instance, there's one launching on Friday, an Innovate UK Smart Grant. I think the deadline will be March. You'll then take usually a month. You've got to submit some paperwork to the monitoring officer at Innovate UK. You then launch it. When will you get the first money? That's the key thing. You need to understand all things. When will you will have to fund it first, and then you will have to claim it back. There's a lot of detail to think about. And I put 30% match funds. The asterisk means it varies in every case. It could be 45%, could be 50, could be 70, depends on the grant. So just to bring that example to life, what I've done here is I've assumed that there's a £100,000 project. It's going to take you 6 months, and it's going to attract 70% grant funding. So the application closes on the 20th of January, and that will call that month 1. On the 26th of March, you're notified about the results. So that's month 3. You then spend a month getting everything together, and you aim to launch it on the 1st of May, say. You then run it for 3 months, and your monitoring officer says, right, can you give me proof of this, that, and the other? And you submit your first payment claim. About a month later, fingers crossed, you'll get your first grant payment of 35,000. You're then into the second 3-month period. You do the same again, submit all the paperwork, and you get paid at the end. So you can see that there's a lot of preparation involved to get £35,000 in month 9 and then in month 12. And that's an approximation, okay? So be aware of the cash flow implications of a big grant application. So that is a cook's tour of both local and Innovate UK grants. I'm Simon Monaghan. I'm an innovation and growth specialist with RTC North, based in Leeds. As I said, we are delivering the innovation and growth program for Innovate UK across the north of England. If anybody is running an innovative, growing, scalable, and ambitious business, then we would love to talk to them. Thank you. Any questions?
Fantastic. Thank you, Simon. That was really interesting and helpful. And just to note that we will be circulating all of the slides to everyone after the session, so that you've got Simon and Jane and Dennis's contact details. I'm conscious that we have run over slightly, so anyone that needs to jump off, feel free to. We do have one question from Phil Holdgate. If we can cover that in a couple of minutes. Phil, do you want to turn your microphone on and ask Simon the question yourself? If you're still there.
Yeah, just give me a sec. Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Great. Hi, Simon. Yeah, it was a really specific question, so slightly maybe off on a tangent to what you specifically offer, but I was wondering if there's any support for non-profits, social enterprises, that kind of thing, specifically around climate-related projects that are looking for grant funding.
Are you talking Innovate UK or local?
Anywhere. I'm not that fussy, to be quite honest. I think the answer is probably yes, but there's always the devil's in the detail. Where are you based? We're based in Leeds.
Right.
It's a sort of, I'm talking specifically about a network that represents the sort of arts and culture sector. So it would be to the advantage of the whole sector rather than us as a specific organisation. Well,
I'm probably, rather than getting into the detail of it now, if you just follow up with me afterwards, and I'll try and steer you in the right direction afterwards.
Thank you.
Just to say, for European funding, a non-for-profit company can apply.
Good to know, thanks.
And then lastly, Lisa is asking, can you apply for more than one Innovate UK grant opportunity at the same time?
Yes, I believe you can. I don't know if you won more than one. I don't know if there will be some implications, but I've certainly know somebody at the moment has got a couple of applications in. They've got one of the thematic ones underway and the smart grant. one of the questions you will be asked on an application is this a resubmission? So you should never lie about that. And actually, I think the Innovate UK records will find out. But yeah, I think you can submit more than one application. And you can apply at different stages as well. I'm aware of organisations that have launched a project and then they've had it funded to the next stage several times. You know, obviously it's about the potential. So this is where you've got to make the case. You know, what's the impact on the British economy in terms of jobs, GVA, exports, technical know-how, and all the rest of it. So it's very subjective.
Yeah, if you apply for two, got to make sure that the deliverables are very different, because if we have had Innovate UK have had cases where they're very, very, very similar deliverables with different projects. So obviously then if that's the case, it's classed as double funding, so you can't do. So if you are going to put more than one submission, make sure it's very clear and very different deliverables.
Fab. I hope that answers your question, Lisa. Lisa, thank you in the chat box. So I'm assuming that does, but again, you can connect in with the speakers if you've got any more questions afterwards. Thank you to Dennis, Jane and Simon for joining us, and thank you to everyone for logging on. I hope that you found it to be useful, and as I've said a few times, we'll circulate the slides and you can connect and follow up with any of the speakers if you have anything specific to say. We're going to kind of log off now. We've gone a little bit over, but I think it was worthwhile and really productive. Thank you all. Have a great morning.
Thank you, Alan. Thank you very much.